Quelli dov'è? Proprio. Dice bocca un po' sta.
Sei in diretta. Dalle mie parti si dice allippa.
Gente che si avvicina, porta documentazione. C'è una maglietta. Ah, come vuoi. Non so se si presenta qualcun altro. Oh, ciao, no, entra qualcuno. Ok. No. Me l'hai appena ricordato.
Ok, allora cominciamo. So, it's time for the next speaker, Massimiliano. We'll be talking about the importance of documentation. So, thank you, Massimiliano. Let's get it started.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Well, I have to ask forgiveness in advance because this is the very first time for me speaking English at a conference. So I hope for the best, but I cannot guarantee anything. My name is Massimiliano. I work as a software developer in a small company based in the very middle of Italy. I like to define myself a full stack developer. Well, before we start, let's agree on some terminology. What is poetry? Of course, poetry is a literary form, a way to write down things, I would say. But how can distinguish between what is poetry and what is not? How can you say, okay, this is a piece of poetry? Well, according to my heritage, literal heritage, I'm Italian, of course. Something is poetry when it has three canons: verse, rhyme, and stanza. Let's see what they are. A verse is a sequence of words in a single line. It is formed by syllables, and this follows strict rules about how long a verse has to be, where the accents are put, and so on. The rhyme is an analogy, the equality of two sounds coming from different words. We may say verse gives rhythm to a piece of poetry, and rhyme gives melody. Stanzas are a group of verses. You may have groups of 3 verses or 4 verses. A stanza of 3 alternate to a stanza of 4, and so on. Even this follows strict rules defined by the metrics. Let's see an example. This is a stanza from a piece by Giovanni Pascoli, an Italian poet. This piece was written back in the very beginning of the 20th century. The title is Night Blooming Jasmine. Well, you can see this is a stanza. It has 4 verses. The first verse has 11 syllables. The second has 9. The third has 11 again. The fourth has 9 syllables. So very strict rules. The tab is there because it's part of the verse. The poet put the tab in that verse to give an aesthetic form to the stanza. So we may say, okay, this is poetry. But what I like the most of poetry is the hidden meaning. The poet is telling something that is not written down directly. So you may notice a powerful sexual metaphor in this piece. And this is beautiful. You can notice the aesthetic of this piece, the music. If you declaim this piece aloud, I'm not gonna declaim anything this morning. But I like it. I like it very much. So let's see another piece. Things are a little bit different. So what about the meaning? The meaning is pretty clear. Actually, it's quite difficult to write code which is not expressive in Python, so the meaning is clear. But would you say this is a beautiful piece, aesthetically good? Would you say it is elegant, or I don't say so. Let's see another piece. The meaning is exactly the same. These 2 snippets do both the same thing, but I would say the second one is a little bit fancier than the first. It's aesthetically good. I mean, the meaning is quite more clear. So we should agree that there's some difference between the snippets, even if the meaning is the same. So at this point, you may know what I mean. Maybe saying that code is poetry is a little bit exaggerated, but we can agree that you can write code in a poetic fashion, like the second example. So you may say, okay, the second snippet was quite good. What's wrong with it? What's wrong with poetry in general? Well, I really like poetry, but let's be honest, poetry is difficult. Let's see this other example. It's the same poet as before. This is another piece, another lyric, The Last Dream. You can find very clearly the 3 canons, the verse, the rhyme, the stanza. But what about the meaning? What the poet are telling to us? I really don't know. This is a very difficult piece. Well, the same may happen for code poets. What about this piece of code? I really like this piece of code. I think it's elegant. It's very pragmatic. It's a powerful snippet. But if I ask you, what does it do? You may answer, okay, just give me a sec. I have to read the code 1 time, 2 times, read again. It would be easier if I would give you the calling code, or if I would give you some context, some code before, some code after. But we may agree that it's not always easy to read other people's code, or even your own code. So cannot leave the poetry alone. And here comes the prose in help. But what is prose? Usually, prose is defined as everything is not poetry. Eugenio Montale is a very famous Italian poet. He won the Nobel Prize in 1975 for literature, of course. And once he was asked about, well, what's the difference between prose and poetry? How would you say? And he answered, well, prose is horizontal while poetry is vertical. Actually, what did he mean? Poetry is very emotional. It's short and it can give rapid feelings. Poetry can make you sad or happy in a very quickly, very rapidly, and has few words than prose, but are usually elegant words or difficult words. While prose is horizontal, is wider and is a little bit more slower than poetry, and can take the reader along a journey that brings you from point A to point B slowly, using easier words and easier concepts. You can go back and forth along a prose piece. So this is basically the difference. In my metaphor between code and poetry, I would say that prose is the documentation of the code. But why developers don't write prose? Well, according to my very own experience as an open source writer, I made an educated guess. The problems are mainly two. Problem number one, quantity. Often the code is less than the docs. Documentation is huge respect of the code. You have to write tutorials, screenshots. You have to write articles, post it on your blog, on other people's blogs. You have to advertise your blog posts on social networks or mailing lists. You have to answer to questions on the mailing list on Stack Overflow or Reddit. And this is a very time and life-consuming job. But quantity is not the only problem. There's not a problem about the quality. Writing code is more fun, at least for me, but I think also for other developers. Another problem is writing documentation in English, which is the standard language for the IT world. As a non-native English speaker, writing code is easy for me as an Italian, but writing documentation is pretty difficult. There are verbal forms that are complicated. You have to use past tense, futures. It's conditionals is pretty complicated. And you have to take in consideration that the people who are going to read your documentation doesn't speak English or read English very well as well. So even if you are a mother tongue, you cannot write in a too complicated fashion your documentation. So you have to be wise when you choose the words and your phrases writing docs. And another problem is argument with strangers on the internet. You post a link on Reddit, a bunch of people yell at you, your things are bullshit, and so on. You have to argument. And this is sometimes disheartening. But why I think you should write prose? Well, other poets, other code poets can get to your project dig into your code, even bypassing completely documentation. But not everyone is a code poet. Normal humans, before starting digging into the code, read your documentation. And this is a simple equation which I applied in my experience. More humans, more users for your project. More users, more contributors. And more contributors and less work for me. Well, you have to be, first step, write the documentation. Second step, be good at writing documentation. Well, if your project is almost complete, your code is already in place, well, there's no an easy workaround. You have to work hard as hell. You have to write your doc starting from zero. You have to invent the use cases, the tutorials. You have to review your code and fill the gaps in your doc strings, or trying to explain code that's 1 year old and you don't even remember why it's there and what it does. So there's no workaround. You have to, have a beer, put on some music, and work hard. But if your project is not yet started, you are going to start your project, or you have few code in place, well, you can simplify the process, writing documentation even before the code. Some people define this as documentation-driven development. So the process is write your use cases, write your docs, then write your code. So if you struggle writing documentation or documenting your use cases, maybe your code is not a good idea. This is the principle. Personally, I don't use this approach. I usually I first write the code. First write the doc strings, then the code, then the documentation. But if you iterate this process in small chunks, writing documentation is much more easy. So this is what I learned as an open source maintainer and developer. Always write doc strings for your and your team's mental health. If you write doc strings at the very beginning, when you start writing code, it's much more easier. You know precisely what are you doing now in that moment, and it's easy to document what you are about to do. And write good docs, spend time on them, and make them available on the internet. Nowadays, it's very, very easy to put your documentation in a very good form, even in practical forms. You can use read the docs, for example. You can attach the build of your documentation to your continuous integration systems. Very, very easy. No excuses for that, for not doing that. Write tutorials. Tutorials are very important. Tutorials is where normal users starts from. The more tutorials, the more happy users. Write articles. You have to show people how they can use your code. Write articles, publish articles, write on your blog, contribute to others people's blog. Write articles. And the most important, listen to your users. Even if you are on your project mailing list, and some people ask for dumb questions that may be answered reading the page 1 of your documentation. Be patient. There are no stupid questions, only stupid developers that don't answer. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Massimiliano. Are there any questions?
Thanks a lot for your talk. I have a question about some technical advices. I mean,
Do you have any technical advice you may give us to write better documentation, in the sense that some instrument to use in the case of Python code, for instance?
There are several ways to write your docs. I personally use I have a docs folder on my project. I write the REST documents on it, and I attach the build to my docs file, so that when I make tests, I also build the documentation. And I have hooks on GitHub, so that after every push, read the docs, take my docs, and build them, and makes them available on the platform. The very cool thing is that documentation is versioning in the same way your project is versioned. So it's very easy for the users coming to the right version of your docs for the version of your project that they're currently using. I don't use the things like PyDocs, or I don't remember the name of the project. I write documentation. I don't use things that gather doc strings and that dig into your code. I write documentation as I would write an article on my blog. So I use paragraphs, quotes, and titles, subtitles, chapters, and and so on.
Hi. The Italian is your mother tongue. What do you do with the internal documentation? I mean, not all your project will be open source. So, I mean, I talk about my personal experience. The overhead for write English documentation for some internal code. I mean, the overhead is sometimes too much. What do you do in your company?
Yeah, in my company, we have some projects that involves teams of only Italian people. So you may say, why not writing docs and doc strings in Italian? But we always use English, even on the comments of the commits, or the name of the branches, or the comments on the pull requests. We always use English. The overhead, the more you write in English, the easier you do it. So the overhead tend to go down the more you use. So it's a way to make practice. So you make practice inside your company, where you can fail safe with your colleagues, and then you can go with a better English on your open source projects. It's weird sometimes. I know. Yeah, invoice. But we, but we use English terms even for them. We use the terms taxes, invoice, VAT numbers, whenever possible. It's not always possible. I mean, IMPS is IMPS. But we use social number instead of codice fiscale, and yes, it's a little bit weird now.
That's because the social number.
Yeah. Luckily, we don't do much ERP software, so we are pretty lucky. The domain is usually international. I mean, we work a lot on the scientific field, so it's very easy. Use English. You comes natural.
Okay, so any more question? Okay, so let's thank Massimiliano. Thanks, Massimiliano.
Thank you for being here.
So we have the coffee break in 20 minutes, so plenty of time to go around.